districts have used in the past. It's not publicly noticed for a vote on this today, obviously, but I want everyone to have the opportunity to see it. It's, again, draft form, it's already been modified with some input from Randy, because when I initially drafted this and sent it to Joe and Randy, I didn't include anything about hiring practices, curriculum, because those just aren't my areas. So the proposal I had, that this would be something we would come forward and talk more about in March. I'm glad that there are people here to talk about it and ask questions about it, because it's been one of those things that I've heard a lot about, not just recently, but over the course of the last 2 years. I've been directed saying that I think we need a specific place to talk about these varieties of issues, because they'll always be coming forward in front of us when an issue happens. But if we can get out in front of things and be proactive, it's much better than being reactive. So it's not limited to any one specific issue. It could go as far as talking about ADA issues, because it never occurred to me, or probably anyone else in the facilities committee, that we have doors that don't open to students that have to travel all the way around middle school until they come to us. And we shouldn't be waiting for them to come to us, and we should be going to them to talk about issues that are important. So that's all.
So the idea is to form an ad hoc committee which would be charged with reviewing and investigating different places where maybe we need revisions of policy or better communication of policy or procedures.
Or really look into, so already I think our policies are better than, for example, Baraboo's. They don't have specific policies in place. Like this district has spectacular policies for how to deal with trans students. It was done before that became a giant national issue. Baraboo didn't have that. Baraboo did have good policies on how to deal with harassment, but they were following their policies. So it's talking about how do you know what we're doing, and are we actually following what we're supposed to be following? So it's a longitudinal way of looking at these issues and actually getting down with the people whose voices we're not hearing from, because this is not a particularly diverse group on the board that might not be hearing these issues unless people are coming up and telling us about them. So this is intended to be a place for people to have that voice that they might not already have here, that we're not hearing about. I don't know what it's like to be a student in this district, or a student that doesn't look like everyone else in the district, or have the same functional abilities as everyone else in the district too. So the idea is to give a space for people to hear.
Thank you. I appreciate that one. So I would like to welcome everybody to the meeting tonight. You might have felt like you were coming in the middle. We do start at 6 o'clock, and we have a closed session. And after that closed session, we always have a time where we do what we call board development. And you kind of walked in during that board development where Mike was presenting an idea of forming this ad hoc committee, and I think some of you are here maybe to talk about that, and I think he has reached out to some people about that. So that's kind of where we're at. We now will begin the open part of our meeting, and again, thank you all for attending. The first thing I need is approval of the minutes from our January meeting and also our special curriculum presentation meeting.
Move approval as submitted.
Second.
Julie and Mark. Any discussion on any of those minutes or modifications? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Next, I need approval of the agenda. Any changes?
As written.
Approval of the agenda.
Second.
Mark and Judy. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Next, we have an opportunity for public comments, and you can comment on items that are in our agenda this evening. And I do have 2 people who filled out sheets that would like to come forward and speak, so I would like to call up Joel Lewis.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is Joel Lewis. My name is Joel Lewis. I thank you for allowing me to come and speak. I'm running for the school board. The thing is that this thing that Mike's proposing, I feel like it's something that we need to do. Just going out and campaigning and talking with people there are just a lot of issues that have presented that people in the communities have just spoken to me about. Some could be disability. I spoke to one mom whose child's on the spectrum, and her concern is more about access to facilities in certain parts of our building. For me, being a black male, I feel like when we start talking about race, there's just a lot of things that in our community, things have happened within the schools. I have 4 kids, and they have just spoken about other things, and I think they've created, or trying to create a space. They actually just came up with the Black Student Union, which I thought was awesome. That's a huge thing. It creates a space for those students. That doesn't mean that they're trying to exclude kids. They're just going to a space where they're able to have conversations, have an understanding. I think with this, I think it's really good because I think we have a lot of issues coming up. I look at the Native American painting that was put out there. Most people see that on Facebook, but it brings about conversation, right? And I think the thing is that it's okay to have conversation and be uncomfortable, but to come up with solutions, we need to be able to address and identify issues. And I think something like this also provides transparency, because I think a lot of times, people don't know like what the outcome is. So even if something is being done, they don't necessarily have their questions answered, or they don't know what the full outcome is. And because of that, people start coming up with their own ideas and thinking that things aren't being done. So I feel like, especially since this is also community-based as well, we're having the community be part of that, not just the board, but the community, because that's what we're here for, right? We're here to serve our community. So I just wanted to just say that I think, as we grow as a district, and we are definitely growing, and different diverse populations are coming into Waunakee, I think we need to do something, and I think we need to be, what Mike said, we need to be proactive instead of reactive. Because I don't want our community to be a variable. Obviously, people don't want to get sued. We don't want kids dealing with stressful issues like that. So I just wanted to show my support for this, and hopefully this is something that you would consider to be a priority. Thank you.
Thank you. I also have Nikki McLaughlin. Would you like to speak? Thank you.
Thank you. I wasn't initially going to speak, but then I realized it would be a good time. So I'm brand new to the district. I've been here 1 month. I moved in from Madison. I moved because in Madison it was clear that the reading program is not doing very well. They haven't switched yet to science-based reading instruction. And I knew that the growth scores here in Waunakee are much better, but I did see that we're at about a 65% proficiency rating among our 4th grade students based on the forward exam, which means about 35% of our students are not reaching reading proficiency. And school districts like Thorpe and Wausau are switching to science-based reading instruction. And the next couple of years, their scores are going to really far surpass ours if we don't switch too. This comes in, and Governor Evers just signed into law that what Wisconsin's going to create a dyslexia handbook. So it comes into place for us to talk about. Right now, not being able to read well is a disability. It's dyslexia. But all of our students who can't read well, it's a large chunk of our population that we could be helping with the systematic phonics and phonemic awareness-based reading instruction. So I think that would go really well also with this ad hoc committee, a topic we could discuss to help our kids read better.
Thank you very much, Nikki. So please know that we have listening sessions with each meeting, and if you have issues that you'd like to bring forward, this is the time to do that. Thank you. Next, I would call up our student report, and we have both Anna and Sean here. Welcome.
Okay. Sean and I are both here this month just to talk to you about what's been going on recently in the school district on behalf of student council. And we have a list of things. Sean, do you want to start saying?
Yeah, so one of the biggest things that probably happened over the weekend, based on like the past month, is how well our athletic program has done. So we had about, I think, Mr. May, 5 people that signed?
Yep.
We had 5 people that signed, 3 for football, 1 for soccer, and then 1 for baseball. And then our wrestling team is doing very good. I don't know if you guys heard about the article that was in the Madison newspaper about Colton Grinville, about him overcoming his injuries and going, I think he's going to state or something. But we've had really great success with our athletic programs. And then another thing that we've had good success with is like the BSU, Black Student Union, which is very good for our school. And then but they also like something they like implemented, which is pretty cool, is like they have a fact of the day. So like it's all like themed. So I think that's pretty cool. And then of course we have
Yeah, so this upcoming Saturday is going to be winter formal. So we have 90 people signed up to go, and it's normally like known to be like not as like much as of a big deal as prom and homecoming, but it's still just like a great time just to get out and enjoy yourself over the weekend. And there's also just like a fun thing that Spanish Club does during like Valentine's Day, like in February. They host crushed soda sales where you can just buy a soda for $1 and just put somebody's name in and give that soda to them just to show that you care for them. So that's just like fun things going on in our school right now. But as Sean said, Black History Month is this month, and the Black Student Union that has been formed this year is doing 2 facts a week. And it's just really interesting to know that, and they're putting signs all over the school, which is really nice just to get a hang of that. And there's also spring sports starting. There's track meetings, as I know, because upcoming track, Sean and I are both in, and there's just a lot of stuff going on right now, especially with spring coming. And there's course registration. Juniors had it last week, sophomores have it this week, and freshmen have it next week. So it's just everybody trying to get a grip on what they're going to be doing next year, and it's just great to see students planning their futures. And I think that's really it. There's a musical coming up. I don't know if it's a musical or play, but it's called Fiddler on the Roof, and auditions are being posted. I'm sorry. It's a musical? Okay, I don't know.
You need to go see it.
Fiddler on the Roof. Yeah. Okay, I didn't know. I'm pretty sure it's a musical. So that's great. And also the club mock trial took home a trophy this past week, I believe, which is amazing. It's musical. Thanks. And I think that's all we have, right?
Yeah, graduation's in 3 months, so.
Don't hurry it along.
Yeah, I have a countdown timer.
You guys make it sound fun to be a student.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, the winter formal is open to all students, correct?
Oh, yeah,
yeah,
all
open to everyone.
students.
And do you have to have a date, or you can just go
Oh,
as a
no,
group
you
of
don't have
friends?
to have a date. You can just buy a ticket. It's $5.
It's my 4th year going alone. So.
You don't have to confess, Sean.
Embrace it, John.
So 90 students sounds kind of low, but you think
Oh,
people are just putting off getting the
yeah,
tickets? and
normally-
stuff?
Yeah, it's actually a lot
Winter
last year.
formal, we're on student council. This is like what we get our position through.
Uh-huh.
And student council like plans the dance and sets it up. And it hasn't been as popular, but like as other dances, but it's actually more popular this year with 90 people going. Like last year's like
30 or 40.
and yeah, maybe higher. I can't remember, but it's optional, no pressure at all. It's just fun.
Good.
Yeah, it'll be great. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
So would you guys mind if you came and spoke like once an hour at our board meetings instead of just at the beginning, just to kind of liven things up?
Yes, of course. Yeah, once an hour.
Oh, okay.
I'm just kidding.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we beat down, of course.
Now you guys better go home and do your homework.
Yeah, lots of homework.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you
Always
so much.
enjoy
Thanks, guys.
your reports.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank
You
you.
as well.
See you all there.
Next, we have our teacher report, Kyle and Ashley.
I think we should go first next time.
We're going to do that.
We were gonna do that.
Ours are not as,
Rebecca, next time, put it on the agenda. We'll put them first.
We're gonna need to bring props.
Candy for everybody. Well, I guess we'll just start off with a few things that are going on with us this month. And I feel like I sound like a broken record because I've told you about these things a couple times, so I'll keep this short. We're very thankful to have a session at our PD Day coming up on the 28th of February, which will be a great thing for some of our members as well as for anyone who would like to out of the district's teaching staff. And then we also have a book study that we're working on, and we talked about that a little bit last month. Green Card Voices. It's part of our initiative for social justice in our schools. We're currently in the process of planning that. It's probably going to be a hybrid of an online course and a meeting in-person course. So we're pretty excited to be able to put forth that PD, something we've always wanted to do in the past, and this year we're finally taking that jump to try to provide that for not only our members, but for anyone who is interested in doing that particular professional development.
Another thing that's coming up is Public Schools Week. It's the last week in February, the 24th through the 28th, and we're encouraging staff to post why they're proud of their public schools. So look for those signs.
And hopefully you'll see some out there on social media for those who are part of social media. Who isn't, I guess, but we're hoping to post as many as we can just to really show the community and anyone who will watch and listen why we love our public schools and why they're so important in our community and across the state and the country as well. So I think that's all we have.
Thank you very much. Next, I would like to ask any board member who has attended any training or anything that you've done over the last month. We've kind of listed the state convention report separately, so anything other than the state convention that many of us have gone to? Mark?
I joined Randy at the second session for the equity training.
Oh, good, thank you.
Sponsored by the Dane County Equity Consortium. Kind of a neat time with Mike's proposal and directions we need to go into in the community to ensure equity amongst all of our student body. And so there's a lot of discussion about what different schools are doing. We sat at a table with Middleton, who've been involved in the program for a good number of years, and we have a lot of work to do, but it's you know, we're making a really good step, I think. So it was good being there, hearing what all other districts are doing.
Perfect, thank you. Any other board member that would like to share? If not, on to the state convention report, and 4 of us were there the entire week. Will?
Sure, I'll start off. I was the voting member of the Assembly delegation, which votes on resolutions of things to advocate for in the state legislature. It's not so much about drafting new legislation as to give indications of positions that we would like to support. And I can tell you that there was only one resolution that failed, which was the fairly controversial one that you might be interested in, which was on the Native American mascots. Actually, this discussion was quite nuanced and rich and full, and it was very interesting to listen to. Some districts had requested an amendment because they had worked with local tribes to get approval to keep their mascots, so that was an interesting point to consider. And some other people stood up and said, well, that only works if you only have one tribe in your district, but some of us have several tribes, and then there could be a question in how long do these agreements last, and is it depending on the current leadership in the Native American group and the current members of the school board, or so that was brought up to be quite problematic. The resolution did fail. The resolution would require retirement of all Native American imagery, mascots, references, and I think the reason that it failed because again, we do tend to default toward local control, and judging by the vigorous debate and argument from across the districts. I think that probably was good. The part about requiring all of them to be retired, you can talk, interesting, both sides of the point. So, yeah, all the rest of the initiatives passed. The other workshop that I think probably I was most interested in was one on communicating with the community and bringing ideas not just for referendum, but including community discussion on many different aspects and things that are going on in our school district, and the idea of forming committees to help disseminate the information out into the public. And we've talked about this before. I think we've got some outreach to do and working with local groups that are already formed, as well as possibly forming ad hoc committees that would better communicate both directions, not just on referendum issues, but certainly with this upcoming, it will be very important to get public input.
Thank you. Judy or Jack, any?
Yeah, actually, a couple of the sessions I went to were just kind of bored how different districts organize boards and communications and so forth, which was pretty interesting. But one of the interesting sessions that I went to was Kenosha has put in a manufacturing automation lab in their tech ed program, and I shared the information with Tim and Mandy to take a look at how can we potentially integrate that into our system. And there's a lot of robotics involved, a lot of programming involved, and that's really kind of the future of manufacturing. It's the future of programming, just to try to, provide more technical opportunities for our kids, kind of manufacturing based, but it's also engineering technical based as well. It was pretty exciting. They've done some really neat things in Kenosha.
Thank you. There were two sessions that I went to that were of particular interest to me. One was on the whole education and concepts behind teenage vaping. And I have reached out to Tim, and actually I found the brochure, Tim, I gave him a little sticky note at another meeting I was at with him. But the organization, it was done by CISA 10 as well as an outside organization, and they had literature as well as education for both parents, staff, students starting in 5th grade on vaping. And I just, with what's going on in that arena, I feel that that's a really important piece of education that we need to include in our curriculum. And the second one, I went to many sessions, but the other one that kind of I think might help us around our table is I went to a session that provided a tool to kind of type us as kind of a personality typing as effective board members. And maybe at a board retreat this summer, it might be a fun thing to do. It's pretty quick. We logged into an account online on our phones, and we got typed, and you found out if you were more of a nurturer or a creator, and then the kind of the personalities. And I just think awareness of our natural tendencies help kind of create better board function. So it might be something that we can do over the summer at a board retreat. So I will hold on to that.
And this is my first year, and I was really appreciative to go to so many unique sessions, but some of the general speakers that they had were very inspiring. And I think that one of the main things that I took away was that we have testing, we have statistics, we have budgets, but we have these talented kids we're privileged to serve as a board, and we had some great music there and several jazz bands and groups, and you realize that we've got a great population we're serving, so I appreciated that.
Just have one more addition. I signed up for the free speech in Wisconsin High School, a symposium for principals, but they've opened it up for board meetings, board members, and it's in the Center for the Study of Liberal Democracy. And I think we've sent some of our principals there in the past. It's more for, you know, what is free speech? You know, what you know, if somebody comes in with a Confederate flag on their shirt, and I thought it would be kind of interesting to hear about, you know, some of the things that you know, they're talking about, you know, from free speech, and it probably goes right into your ad hoc committee that you're trying to organize.
Perfect. Any other thoughts around the, sure?
All the artwork along the wall up here is all artwork that our students submitted to and was on display at the convention. I would say we probably had 20% of all of the artwork that was on display there. Of the 426 districts, we were probably 20% of the board. So when I took it off on Thursday afternoon, it was pretty bare. But it's always very cool to see the work that our kids are doing. This represents our students from, I think the youngest is grade 7, and it goes all the way up through our seniors. So it's awesome to see our art teachers promoting that and our kids putting forth those pieces to display on at a state level.
Thank you, and thank you to everybody who attended. It's always good to get a good group down there and get to know people on different levels. Next, we have the timeline for board and superintendent evaluations. And hopefully everybody did the school perceptions.
I didn't check today.
Okay.
So last time I checked, there were 4 of 7, so.
4 out of 7 had
Yeah.
done them, so if you haven't.
But that
you
was
could
Friday.
get those in. And from my understanding last month, at this point, we are going to complete the 4 questions that accompanied the old evaluation. We had 4 kind of open-ended questions that we also will include with our school perception. So if you could send that out, Rebecca. In the attachments to this meeting, or to our February meeting, we have Randy's evaluation as well as the priorities. But do you want to, I think we could do yours, but I guess I would like to give you an opportunity to kind of summarize where you are with priorities before we do those. So maybe hold off on that one, but you could go ahead and do the open-ended ones and Randy's if you have time this month. And next month, maybe Randy could take 10 minutes or whatever and just update us on the priorities, and then we'll complete that. And you know, I guess I've kind of been pushing for a different timeline, but we have so much going on that we can't even meet to talk about the timeline, so let's just try to wrap it up in February again like we have in the past, and we'll talk about a different timeline maybe at another time.
So related to that, that in the information in our packet, it was requesting stuff to be done by the end of March. I guess I would like to back up whatever pieces we can to tell us to have those completed by the March meeting. Because if we,
Yeah.
to wait all
I
the way
get it.
until the end of March, and board will change in April, and if you want current board to
I
in on
agree.
some of this,
I agree.
the window's gonna get really tight in April, so I hope we can hit those dates.
So if we have Randy's evaluation and the open-ended questions done by the March meeting, I would like to give Randy an opportunity to address the priorities, and then we'll have that done by the February, or by the April meeting, but you'll
Okay.
still be here for the
Okay.
April
Yeah, sure.
meeting. Everybody's still here for April, and then it will be tied up with the current numbers. Clear? Okay, thank you. Moving on to committee reports, starting with curriculum.
done.
Yeah, I guess there are no action items. The minutes were in the board book. Tim has come forward, thank you. And we basically had a report from our assistants at the high school on the current remediation program and how they're kind of looking at making that a little bit more deliberate and organizing that. And if there are no questions, any questions for Tim before we move on? Thank you, Tim.
Well done,
Um,
Tim.
Good job.
Well done.
Well done. We're moving fast. Next, Facility Committee. No questions, moving on.
Well, there's actually one you have to vote on there.
All right. Who's doing facilities
The
tonight?
Facilities Committee, we looked at several things, but ones that really come up for your attention are about the soccer stadium planning, which is just to update that the bids aren't until the end of this month. And that's when we'll have to consider what is going to be the board's level financially of involvement and what angles, which the budget report will get into that because there's a recommendation over there, so no reason to really discuss that. But the other part that we do have to take some form of action on is consideration of the capital budgets projects for both this school year and next school year. Basically, there's two documents in your packet. One is to use up the balance of this year's budget, and one is to look at next year with a list of capital maintenance projects that were recommended by John and Randy.
So I can just kind of reiterate, the ones for 1920, you'll see the entire list of capital maintenance projects. Most of those have been complete. Those were items that were addressed as part of our budget cycle a year ago. What you're seeing is a balance of $40,000. This is dollars that sits within our Fund 10 general fund balance, and were a result of dollars that we had placed in there specifically for facility maintenance projects that were part of or associated with the 2014 referendum funds. So the three projects that John has recommended here are with regards to the band trailer, which needs to be replaced. Second of all is a maintenance trailer, and the third part is the recommendation from the committee was to install a replacement for our high school dishwasher in the kitchen. One of the questions that has come up, and I'm just going to answer your question, Mark, while I'm talking. Mark contacted me today with a question just with regards to where we were with our tennis court payment for the village, because that was a piece that had been on there. We had considered it. The facilities committee at a previous meeting had determined that that would be evaluated at the end of this fiscal year, so in the next few months. But the rest of the recommendation of utilizing the $40,000 does not include that, but includes the two trailers and the dishwasher. So that's the 2019-20 piece. And then the ones for 2021, not 2012, as I have written in my notes, are for projects equaling the $525,000 for projects that we have pulled from our long-range facility plan, and also immediate needs that John has recognized are needing to take place as soon as we are able. Those dollars are, since we have exhausted our dollars from the 2014 referendum in Fund 10, these are Fund 41 dollars in the amount of $525,000. So we're looking for, and there was a recommendation from the committee for both of those.
So we do need a motion on both of those two spendings.
So moved.
Second.
Any other discussion or questions? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Moving on to the Budget Committee. Mark, would you like to take that?
You want me to?
Randy?
I think the biggest thing that we need to talk about tonight is the proposal for the soccer field. At the last meeting, we discussed possible ways that we, as a board, we might consider funding it. After discussion, the committee voted that we would propose funding the cost for the grass field portion of it through Fund 41. And subsequently, if the One Community, One Goal Committee did come forward and ask us for support to help finance their portion of it through the pledging process, that we would recommend using Fund 38. For tonight's meeting, we really don't need to take a vote on either of those if we wish not to. It's open for discussion. We felt it would be helpful for the committee to have a more direct idea where the board would stand at this point. And so options are to vote for in total support of what we recommended as a budget committee, or a part of it, or none of it, till we have all the figures at our next board meeting.
If I can just add a couple things, Mark. One of the things that the committee had discussed and the board has discussed previously was that future referendum funds would not be part of this piece. So that was a starting point of our discussion. We also had a lengthy discussion about Fund 10, which is our general fund, Fund 41, which is our capital maintenance fund, and Fund 38, which is a debt service fund. So Fund 10 is our general fund balance, and there was a conversation as far as what were the pros and cons of utilizing those funds to pay for the equivalent of the grass field, as Mark explained. One of the conversations we held was with regard to Diane Pertzborn, who is serving filling in for Steve during his absence, brought up some really good points with regards to the use of Fund $10. One is given our budget projections that the budget committee looked at for the next fiscal year. It shows a very tight budget, and for seeing that budget being of that nature in the future, the ability to replace the $500,000 or their amount would be difficult in the future. Second piece was to further reduce down Fund 10 would then increase our short-term cash flow borrowing that we do in the fall of the year to cover the differences between when we receive our payments from the state and from tax dollars. So from those two perspectives, then there was really two options that were considered. Fund 41, which has been our capital maintenance fund. We built that up so that starting next school year, it'll be at $2.3 million. And the thought with the projects that we just approved through that John Kramer had put forth, that brings us down to 1.8. And if there were a further use of Fund 41, it would still remain a balance of approximately 1.3 million.
Which the next year would be replenished with another
Which then you would be replaced and then be moving forward. So part of the discussion was at what level do you want to maintain Fund 41 for emergency pieces for facility maintenance. And the third piece we looked at was a Fund 38 borrowing. This is actually a way that a district can borrow up to $1 million, or rolling $1 million, without going to referendum. The payments, though, are paid within the revenue cap. So this was a piece that, as far as the district's portion of the project, they did not feel that this was an appropriate place for us to pull the money from, because it would increase our need for that repayment. And we have not been asked by the One Community, One Goal Committee to finance any pieces, that we just wanted to be proactive in that discussion. If that did come at a point in the future, this could be a possibility of how we could partner with them, within their pledges in dollars, paying that premium that would need to be paid within the caps. So that's really a summary of the discussions that took place around the topic. And after hearing all of those pieces, the recommendation was as Mark articulated.
So we're not going to move this forward tonight.
I think you have two options. I think you can certainly adopt that motion and say this is how we're going to move it forward into the future. The pieces, and I think Mark brought it up at the meeting, was we don't have the bids in from the project yet. But I think generally what the committee has said is that they would like to at least look at, if we're going to make that level of a commitment to look at it out of Fund 41. And that can be, there doesn't need to be an action tonight. That can just be a guidance piece as we come back. I would like to meet with budget and facilities before the March meeting, after those bids are in, so we can see some actual numbers. And then there will be a recommendation coming to the March meeting with regards to that whole issue and with the bids coming forward and with an update from the One Community One Day Committee as well.
Okay, so, should we table that, or does anybody have a motion to?
I guess, I just have some comments, and they're philosophical. It's, we set up Fund 41 that to keep our buildings up. And what we're doing is we're taking funds out of Fund 41 to put on a soccer field. Personally, out of the reserves, that's where I would suggest that we take it, because I think what we're doing is setting a precedent. We've got, major expenses coming up. If you look at just the roofs, if you look at the facilities plan, you're looking at, close to 1.75 million, in the short term. We've got parking lots that, probably need some attention. And I think what you're doing is setting a precedence to take a look or take your eye off the facilities that we have. And I understand, you can make the argument that our sports fields are facilities, but at the end of the day, the buildings serve the entire population. And that's where my philosophical difference would be.
So, Jeff, where would you like to take the money from?
He'd like to take it from the Fund 10 fund balance
Right.
versus Fund 41.
Right.
Julie?
I guess philosophically, I would argue the counter that the fields are another form of our facilities. And I think we're responsible for maintaining them to a safe level of play, and that's not currently where they're at, so.
In fact, I believe, John, aren't our fields on the facility maintenance plan?
Yes.
I believe
Yes.
they are.
Yes.
So, yeah, they are part of everything Fund 41 was for. Now, obviously, there is going to be discussion about, are we funding Fund 41 enough as part of a possible operational referendum? Because, yeah, as you gain extra buildings, your maintenance goes up. And as you gain, but a field, it's got to be funded somewhere on a regular basis. And to take it out of Fund 10 is a problem with the way the property tax levies and everything work. I think the fields are part of maintenance. They're a structure as much as anything. And they've got to be part of a regular maintenance plan.
I guess I'd make the motion now to adopt the budget committee's recommendation of using the Fund 41 and have comment in there if we discuss that.
So we have a motion to adopt Fund 41 for that purpose.
I'll second that so we can further the discussion.
So other discussion, so we have a motion now to take the field out of Fund 41. Other discussions on that?
The only comment I would have on that is, I sat in those meetings, I talked to the soccer coach and heard him say that it's unsafe to play on, and I moderately amused myself by having poor Randy have to go out there and walk the field with our grounds people. And when I look at it and I think, if we had a hole in a basketball court, how would we pay for it? I don't think we should treat something that's inside the building any different from something that's outside the building. It was apparently a new thing we learned at some point, that these fields are depreciable assets that eventually have to be replaced. We're treating them like stripping out a floor in a kitchen in an elementary school, which is one of the things we just voted for about $16,000. I was in Arboretum last week and it didn't look that bad, but it looked like it needed to be done. I mean, we're trusting the professionals that we have, their soccer coaches or grounds people, to tell us when something needs to be replaced. And I totally understand where you're coming from, Jack. It's like we're setting a precedent. I think it's a good precedent to set, that we are saying that we're going to maintain these things as best we can. And I think there's agreement that this is something we want to be in good condition, and whether or not the fundraisers get above the delta to get something different is a different question. We're going to be putting that money in one way or the other. And I defer to what the budget committee said on where we should go from.
Well, I'd like to point out too that we paid to have a study done by Rutler, who, this just isn't anecdotal, the field's in bad condition. The report supports that. And so we've got scientific data that shows the field needs to be fixed. And so if it needs to be fixed, now we talk about a safety issue. I concur with the other arguments that Mike made regarding why wouldn't we treat outside facilities the same way we would inside.
Julie?
And back to Jack's point, to the extent that it is truly a community resource, again, I would like us to consider exploring the possibility of collaborating with the village like we do with the tennis court and some other things, and maybe there could be some funding support back and forth that way too. I mean, I realize it's tax dollars either way, but if it's a community resource, perhaps we should consider that as well.
So if we say that that field is unsafe to play, then should we not have home games on that field this spring? Because what we're doing is basically putting our athletes at risk. I don't think it's unsafe to play, but
I think the safety issue comes when we have the rainy seasons that we have. And how many games last year were postponed till the fields did become judged safer to use.
Right. I think they are evaluated per game.
And that's what Mike was referring to with walking the field, was a question at a meeting following where there was a conversation about it being unsafe and unplayable. And Mike's conversation to me was, well, if they're unplayable, should we be playing there? So that was the assessment I did with I think Aaron and a few other folks, and it is playable, Jack. I mean, it is. I mean, it's not like it's not a playable field.
That's right.
It's not. It is as Mark said. It's when it rains, it's not, because it ponds. It doesn't drain. It has some of those issues. It has undulations. It has some of those pieces that are not ideal. And I think that's that was really the reason we went through with the Rutler report, and that's what their conclusion was the playability during wet conditions, which has been a more consistent factor than not. So that was really their report.
Okay, so we have a motion on the table. Are we ready to vote on that? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
What I would say with that is that will be a piece that will come back through Budget Committee and back through Facilities Committee, and then there will be a review once you have all the bids in for final consideration by the board. So I see tonight's motion as really kind of advisory to how you would, the question was, where would you look for money if you were to support that field? That was the question posed to the Budget Committee.
The next committee is Human Growth and Development, and I saw that Tim just walked out, but
Good time.
that's okay. I don't think there's anything to vote on. That is an ongoing committee. I think there are recommendations that will be coming. I had heard possibly in April. I wanted to compliment him, but he walked out because he ran a great parent meeting last week on Monday night and allowed parents to come in and share their voice on the curriculum. And we did have probably 50 people there, and it was well attended. And Judy and I both were able to sit in the background and kind of hear the concerns of the parents. So it was a great meeting.
And I wanted to add my thanks too, because the committee is taking the work very, very seriously.
They
It was
are.
presented to the curriculum committee, how they're working on it, and the way they're breaking it down and looking at content strands and comparing it to state standards and national standards and what we're currently teaching, and filling gaps and holes and pink dots and green dots for what we got and what we might want to look at and redo. It's very well laid out. They're going at it very systematically, and I think it's great, all the input we're soliciting.
You missed a lot of compliments, Tim. We loved your meeting last Monday. We love how you're running that committee. The members of that committee feel really engaged, and we're looking forward to your report in April. Okay?
Yeah, and more interesting stuff for the curriculum committee at our next meeting.
Perfect, thank you. HR committee, we had a meeting just before this for about an hour and a half, and again, there was nothing that we are bringing forward to vote on, and a lot of ongoing discussions of compensation issues. So thank you, Brian, for heading that up. Moving on to administrative reports. Facility planning.
All right, I'm going to invite, I think, Chris and Jay, you're coming forward, and Andy. Just as, before as those gentlemen come forward, what I've shared with the board and what the community will see here tonight is really a summary of some of the high-level discussions and some initial costings of some options that the board has asked to start to see and start to vet through. What you're seeing in the presentation tonight is far from any sort of recommendation stage. It's truly just a point where, as we've done special workshops with the board, led by these gentlemen and the principals of those facilities, to walk through Heritage, the middle school, and the high school. There's been different aspects of those buildings that we have targeted as wanting to see some improvements to, and what these folks have done is really gone through, taken a look at those in a full scope, worked with the principals to help understand the issue, and then put some high level dollars to them, just to give you an idea. Where this is leading up to is I'm following their presentation here tonight. I'll talk a little bit about some enrollment projections, and then we'll be setting a future meeting. Hopefully, I've suggested next Monday, the 17th, for really a meeting of the board, our teams from Vogel and EUA, and our administration, to sit around the table and really start to talk through some of these pieces, identify some of the pathways, and look at what our next steps can be. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you gentlemen, and appreciate you being here tonight.
All right, thank you all for having us in. Andy Lyons from Epstein Architects.
Chris Michaud, Epstein. Jay Thompson, Vogel Brothers Building Company.
So our goal tonight is really to work through some of these very preliminary options and costs. And Chris will be spending a fair amount of time discussing those options. Jay will be talking costs. I want to spend just a moment or two kind of reiterating what Randy said, providing a little bit of that background, reminding all of you of that planning timeline, and then we'll finish up with a couple of next steps. So, as Randy said, tonight, very preliminary discussion of facilities options at a number of different buildings. We're presenting estimated costs that are associated with those options, and we're hopefully engaging all of you in a conversation about those options and costs. We hope to gather some feedback from all of you, take that feedback with us, and refine those options in preparation for our next steps with the board. We are not presenting today any sort of finalized plan, any sort of referendum proposal, any sort of final project. So please keep that in mind. We're at the very, very early stages of this planning process. There's a lot of work to be done with all of you as we gather your feedback. There's a lot of work to be done with the staff and with the community as well, as we gather feedback and input from all of the different constituencies that have a say in this. So this is our planning timeline here with November as our hypothetical referendum date. We use that date as a spot from which to plan backwards. As you see in February here, we're at the stage where we're developing options and putting costs to those options. We'll spend a fair amount of time, as I said, already refining those options as we move into the springtime. And then as we get into June, July, August, potentially finalize a project with all of you. As we do that work, Facilities Committee is running concurrently, providing their input on facilities maintenance options and priorities. Budget committee is doing work as well, discussing the financing, financing of the project. And we're also, as I said, doing a lot of work with the community, ensuring that the community has an opportunity to have its say in the priorities. So you've seen this already, 2014, phase 1 of the project. You know that scope well. Phase 2 of this planning project is still yet to be determined, but there are some buckets of work, as you well know. Heritage, we'll talk about that today. New middle school, potentially the existing middle school and high school, and then a couple of other kind of ancillary parts, the least of which is not district-wide capital maintenance, which is a significant one. So as we move into Chris's piece here, as he has been developing options, we've had these 3 or 4 kind of lenses in mind here as our key project drivers. Enrollment growth, long-term enrollment growth is certainly one of them. Addressing the need to remediate some capital maintenance needs is an important project driver, as is modernizing the district's learning environments. You've really brought into the 21st century the intermediate school. Is there an opportunity to do some of that similar work at one or more additional facilities? And then we're kind of continuing your long-range master plan that was built in 2014 or prior.
All right, thanks, Randy. Now, a while back, I believe it was November, we had a board workshop which went through Heritage. So this is kind of a refresher on Heritage. I'm going to show you 4 options. Originally, we presented 3 options. We added 1 per your request at that workshop. So the first option, option 1, really, and I guess all 3 of these options look at different scales of renovation within the building. So the first one is essentially renovating the building as is, with no additions to the building. So we'd be identifying scope in the building that hadn't been completed at the last referendum in 2014. You can see some of the plans here, looking at both extensive renovation in certain areas, light renovation in others, also with building enclosure renovation. And when we get into the costing numbers, we'll talk a little bit about some of the high-level things that are included within those and within all of these options. As we go to option 2, this is where you begin to see some of the additions come into play. So in this option, this is one where the oldest part of the building from the 1930s through 1960s, 70s, at the northernmost part of the site, that would become demolished. We would maintain the 86 edition as well as where the main portion of Heritage is now at the south. And with this potential option, option 2, we're looking at 2 additions. At the south, we propose a kindergarten addition, as you can see here in orange. And the existing kindergarten rooms would be transitioned to first grade rooms. And the reason why we're proposing kindergarten addition is because 3 of the 6 existing kindergarten rooms are really undersized for kindergarten usage. We discussed this at the last board workshop. So at this end of the building, we'd have a small addition for a kindergarten wing and maintenance and receiving. At the north end of the building, where the older portion of the building is, we tear that down, build a new 2-station gym, new music and art facilities, student services, and some other supporting functions for the building. From the 86 edition and the other would remain intact, and you can see that we're still carrying the levels of interior renovations, whether it's heavy or light renovation, in those areas as well. As we go to option 3, this is one where we demolish the older portion at the north as well as the 86 edition, leaving just the portion of Heritage right now where the Heritage main entrance is. And in this option here, we're proposing that you make that addition to the east, sort of southeast of that, That's the easiest from a logistical point of view to put the addition at that location, because you would be able to operate your existing facility 100% while you build this, and then you can close and demolish after you turn over into the new facility. So this does have a rather seamless way to go about phasing of the construction.
How does your traffic pattern, does that affect your traffic pattern at all, by doing that?
It changes traffic pattern because
Is it a better traffic pattern? Is
it does. It allows some
business?
it allows some flexibility. Currently, you've got your traffic pattern occurring in here. We would change that to be a larger loop through this area. So you could do a pickup and drop off with more of an extended loop. You get more queue on your site, and then you could still handle busing either on South Street, or we could explore maybe a small bus loop on site here since you own all that. That would be something that would be done obviously after this is turned over and you do the demolition. So that part would have to be phased, but that's something that we could obviously look into depending on the district's wish to see how far we pull that off. But I would say, yeah, it does make improvements to your existing circulation on the site. Okay, that's option 3, and essentially what that addition houses is a kindergarten and 3rd and 4th. 1st and 2nd grade would be in the original building, 1st grade taking over the original or the existing kindergarten rooms. So you would end up with a 1st, 2nd wing, kindergarten on the 1st floor of the new addition, and 3rd and 4th on the 2nd floor of the new addition. As you can begin to see in these proposals too, some of the lighter orange areas, those are breakout areas or more breakout collaborative areas, very similar to what we've done over at the intermediate school. So as we look at these options, anything that we're building new, we are looking to build it in a more modern learning environment way. So, and I can touch on that just a little bit here after I talk about option 4. So option 4 is essentially building an entirely new elementary school, and we propose you build it on the site behind the existing school, and then once that is complete, you would demolish the existing school. So this is a brand new facility, and if you were paying attention to the numbers down at the bottom in terms of the square foot and you add those together, you will see that from option 2 to 3 to 4, the square foot does increase a little bit. And that's because as we bring on more and more of the new modern learning environments, they do take up more square foot with those breakout collaborative areas. So you are building a little bit more square footage into it as you go from option 2 to option 4. And so if that was a question for anybody, that was the reasoning behind it. I'm gonna turn it over to Jay, and essentially what we're gonna do is we're gonna go through kind of a school site, go through the numbers and back and forth that. So feel free to add questions as we go through this here.
All right, thanks, Chris. So before I get into the numbers, I want to talk through some of the major assumptions, just so everyone understands really the basis of these budgets and estimates. They are based on a conceptual scope of work, not final design, so pretty much everything you saw is everything we had to price these. Obviously, we do have experience building schools, and we've relied on that, and we've had a ton of conversations with the team. But it's really those floor plans and those shapes, and that's what we've used to do this. So it still is at a conceptual level. We've used the actual costs of similar projects to inform these estimates. Again, both internally at Vogel and then working with EUA and things we're seeing in the current marketplace to really help inform these estimates. They are based on 2020 dollars, so what we've taken into account is dollars based on through the end of this year. All options have a new geothermal HVAC system, which is the same system that was installed recently at the intermediate. And so whether it's the renovation option 1 all the way to the new building, and each option between, we have included a geothermal system in each of the options. All maintenance items go ahead, Jack.
Are these geothermal systems expandable? So if you expand the facility, can you bring other parts on for the geothermal?
If
The-
they're, yeah.
It depends on the field. Really, the field where the wells are, that determines the capacity of the system. Typically, you don't put in a lot more wells than you need day one, just because it reduces the efficiency of it.
Right.
So it is expandable, but you'd want to plan on having additional area to put additional fuel in.
And some of the infrastructure if you need to expand it.
From a maintenance perspective, as you've heard reference to that facilities maintenance plan, we've included in each of our options all the immediate items on that plan through year 4 in all these options. So in option 1, it ends up being about $5 million of items, whether it be roof, windows, certain mechanicals, electrical equipment. Now in option 4, obviously it's a new build, so you don't have any maintenance dollars, but then you're avoiding that $5 million. So just want to make sure everyone was aware that we have pulled in a lot of that maintenance, all of that maintenance scope. We've included $2,000 per student for furniture, fixtures, and equipment. This is a little lower than what we're carrying, you'll see on the new build on the middle school. And that's primarily because depending on the options, there might be some reuse of existing stuff that's already in the building. And then we're carrying a contingency range between 15 and 20%. So for a full renovation where you have a lot more unknowns, we're at 20%, and then as you get to the new build, we're at 15%. Those numbers are very solid numbers based on where we're at, just from it being a conceptual design at this point. The other thing I would like to note is, that's not up here, but as I share these numbers, these are all in project costs. So it includes the soft costs, which is design, the furniture, fixtures, and equipment, any testing that needs to be done on the site, any surveying, and then it also includes the contingencies and the construction. And so when you take a look at that, construction ends up being about 70 to 75% of these overall numbers, depending on how much contingency is in the options. So as we look at option 1, as Chris indicated, this is existing, the existing facility remains and it gets renovated. About 100,000 square feet total, roughly, of renovation. There is about 46,000 square feet that does not require renovation, but it's a little bit of a misnomer because those areas would require fire protection to be installed, and so there could be some scope associated with that work. And then some stair work in those areas. And then also, as I mentioned, the geothermal system would be included for the entire square footage. And so, although majority of the renovation is at 100,000 square feet, the entire building ends up getting touched. When you look at the skin of the building, we do have dollars in there for any tuck pointing or any work that needs to be done on the exterior, replacement of the windows, replacement of all the roofs. So at the end of the day, you're getting pretty much a new building, except really the bones of that building, you know, the foundation and the majority of the structure. As you go into options, go ahead, Mark.
I don't know if you can give us a number, but, you know, when we viewed the facility, my impression was that essentially the second level of the old high school is going to need work, but it's not going to be utilized space because we just don't have the use for it. So do you have a rough number how much that of the project that would be?
Well, right now there's about, I think, 18 to 20,000 square feet up in that second floor. And so as I mentioned, there's 46,000 square feet that doesn't necessarily need work. That's part of what falls into that, is that area you're talking about, both on the second floor there and then down in the basement. There's some areas that you wouldn't really use, but with the sprinkler and the HVAC and some of those items would have to be extended to those areas.
So several million probably from the project will go to unattended areas. Is that a fair?
No, it's way less than 7 million.
That's a several.
Oh, several. I don't recall exactly off the top of my head what we had included for those areas, but my guess is you're ending up spending $10 to $15 a square foot in those areas. Some of the other area that doesn't need to be touched is the area that was touched last time. We've tried to accommodate for those areas as well, just knowing that they got recently.
So just to give a good example of what Mark was talking about, the upper level, but if you go into the basement, the lowest level where you have those locker rooms, those would not be a space that we're utilizing with kids. but they would have to have some of the amenities that Jay is talking about. So it's certainly a spot we're not gonna use instructionally. We probably don't have a whole lot of functional use for it, but it would have some requirements for us to touch.
So then as we move to option 2, again, this has about 60,000 square feet in new and about 76,000 square feet of existing. This includes those 2 new additions, as Chris alluded to. Again, a bunch of the same assumptions from the maintenance list, all the existing building. We have accounted for the roofs and the exterior work as long as interior work. This does also then include the demolition of the north original portion as well, included in these numbers. From a phasing standpoint, there's different challenges with each of these, but so we've really treated that phasing and the timeline for each of these similar. But in this scenario, a challenge you would have is, what do you do with tearing down the gym while you build the new gym? You would have to come up with some solutions for a phasing plan as far as that goes. Option 3, this option also includes all that demolition. Based on where the addition goes out to the east there, it does infringe upon that the football field and the irrigation system, so we've accounted for redoing that system as well. And then all the regrading and site work associated with where the existing buildings to the north would be. I will note that option 3, there is a little bit of a typo there. As us and the EUA were reviewing this, that should be 45.3 million, not 43.3 million.
It's a big typo.
Andy was trying to get the discount.
Trying to make it on the other side, yeah.
Just 2 million.
Just a 5% difference.
And then the total square footage here, new is about 106,000, existing 34. So this is where you really shift to a lot more new square footage. And then option 4 on the new side ends up being about 145,000 square feet and at that 47.8 million. Again, this would have to be built while you left the existing building in place, and then ideally over that summer you could tear everything down and do the site work and regrading before the following school year. The field actually here really gets totally relocated up to that north area. Yes, Mark?
I think for those who are here from the public, it'd be good for them to know why we asked for an option 4. That we were thinking initially of a brand new school, but since we were costing out what the expense would be for renovation add-ons, we wanted to make sure what a number for a new school would be in comparison, so we could see which is the most cost-effective to meet the needs. So strictly was to have more information and a greater clarity on what we might do. So a question with the geothermal, with the amount of work towards the back end, I'm assuming the geothermal would be on the east side of the project?
Yeah, so one of the big drivers of the geo is you do a conductivity test to figure out how many wells you have to put in. But in these scenarios, so like in option 4, it pretty much has to be where the track is, because you don't have the greenfield space underneath your existing building to put the wells in, and the wells need to go in before you finish.
So do the costs include at least by-ed playable area, or does it even include the track?
Replacing what you have there, and in fact, on the facility maintenance, the track is included in that immediate to year 4 mark.
Okay, yeah.
So the replacement of the track is included actually in all the options, whether you need to put the geo field there or not.
Thank you.
Do we need a track?
Track, yeah.
Middle school.
Middle school.
Yeah, that is, right now, Judy, that's where our middle school kids practice.
Oh,
And
And it's
that's,
a 300 meter versus a 400
yeah,
meter.
that's,
okay, I thought it was the grade school.
I think that's the original high school football field back in that area. Is that right?
No.
That's right.
Did you do any analysis on number of seats in each one of these options for how many students, the capacity they have?
Same capacity for all options.
They're all the same.
So they're built off of a 6-track
Yeah,
model.
6-track schools.
I'm assuming the answer to the question is no, but they're, given, I mean, just looking at 3, with the orientation of the building being swapped to almost have entirely south-facing, that suggests to me that there's gonna be different type of utility costs for the building, like less lights on, because there's more light coming in rather than the way it's structured now, where it's north and south, and the north side gets no natural light. Does that have a factor at all in long-term costs, and it's not factored in right here, but is that something that's a design consideration?
We do try to orientate east-west, just because sometimes it's a little bit easier. You can go through a little less hoops to get that even lighting throughout the building. Do you have to go east-west? I think there's ways in which you can do a vertically oriented or north-south oriented building, yet still capitalize on east-west or penetrations. So I don't think it's going to really impact too much, but it may have an impact on the overall operation.
Staying on that sustainability piece as well, from a daylighting perspective, we've also included green roof, approximately about 3 times what's currently at intermediate, and all of these options as well. Knowing that that's something at least important to look at from a board perspective.
Should we go to the, do you have a feel for how much that green roof adds? Is it 20%, 10% more?
Right now, it's about $150,000 throughout the 4 options.
For those of us who are not here in previous referendums, just need Judy, what's the
Big question. So green roof is, so if you're familiar at the intermediate school, being able to plant roofs help from a sustainability point of view of creating an insulated layer. At the intermediate school, I would say it's mainly a learning feature to talk about that. I don't think it really functions in order to take dollars off the bills at that point. So Jay's saying that the green roof area that he's budgeted is about, four times that, the area that we have there. So there's potential to maybe do a more extensive learning opportunity, even maybe capitalize on trying to, do a little bit more insulated quality to a portion of it.
Is there anything in these that are more involving like solar power or anything like that as well on the roofs or anything?
So we've not included solar panels, but we've included structural and everything to be able to accommodate solar panels to be added to the roof.
And typically what we've been seeing with districts is you're presented with a choice with your local utilities as to whether you want to own and operate an array, similar to, I believe, what you do at the intermediate school, or whether you want to lease your rooftop to a utility provider. And when you lease your rooftop, typically you don't have that taken off your meter. That's usually straight to the utility company, and they pay you a fee to rent your rooftop, essentially. Okay. We've got a couple more to go through here, so I'm going to go through the middle school at this point, or the new middle school, sorry. So we've always known that your master plan is indicated at the site where you have your intermediate school that potentially is a site for a 7-8 middle school. We have 2 options here. To keep it simple, these are very similar options when you look at them. Essentially what we're doing is in option 1, we're suggesting that you take the approach like you did with the intermediate school and you build for a smaller capacity day 1. So we're showing an 800 student capacity to align with the 800 capacity at the intermediate school. And then design it in a way that you could expand it in the future to a larger capacity. So if you look at the far left side of the intermediate school, you'll see that dashed in area there, which is where we plan to have a future expansion. We would do the same thing with the middle school. So you design a smaller school day 1 and plan for an addition. The second option, obviously, is to just build the whole building all at once. And that's that's one of the things is, do you pay more now, do you pay more later? Do you address what you need now in terms of student capacity versus maybe holding off a little bit and building when you need the capacity? And also keeping in mind how much space you want to actually operate and the utilities on, and how much space you want to clean and all that sort of thing. So that's essentially the two differences there. We know there's a number of different ways that we can nuance this diagram to make it work on the site. We're showing one option right here. We are pretty confident that you're going to have this much pavement. You're going to need to expand and create more stormwater retention on your site. We're going to need outdoor space for kids. We're going to need to figure out how to get service vehicles into both school areas. So we're beginning to think about those things, and we're looking also at the site, the amount of topography that's there. So Vogel's got a good hand on understanding that site in their numbers. So
If I can add something, Chris, one of the things that we've discovered as we've laid the footprint down is it doesn't allow for some of the space for middle school athletics or after-school activities. There's not room for a track. There's not room for other activities like our 7th and 8th grade football program. Some of those we would have to utilize other space, which may include us transporting kids back towards the high school, current middle school site behind Heritage. Some of those areas that we utilize now may still need to be used because there's not the capacity or the topography or some of the other pieces that we have to account for on the site to include it out here.
yeah, usable square footage, especially around the periphery of your site, is a little challenging because of the drop-offs that occur there. So, I mean, you might have some practicing capabilities, but it is pretty limited once you put everything you need to on site.
I apologize, what's the orientation here?
North is up.
Woodlands at the top, right?
Here's the
Is
first and
Woodlands?
main road, here's the intermediate school, the main parking lot.
Oh, got it,
the main
okay,
entry.
all right. Thank you. So, in terms of the, and this is early for a presentation, maybe I shouldn't even ask it, but one of the things I had seen at the intermediate school is the quagmire traffic. And I don't know if that was ever anticipated, but it's voluminous, and so is there a way to enhance the car drop-off that will be out there because of its location?
Yeah, the likelihood is that we haven't had any discussions with municipalities in terms of, you know, what potentially might be needed, but the likelihood is there will be more renovation to your Woodland Drive there in order to accommodate the additional traffic. We don't know exactly what they may require in terms of traffic control, but we're going to need, to look at the ingress and egress from the site more than what it is showing right now.
Okay.
The internal site circulation would be designed to maximize the amount of queue space and also keep the vehicle streams as autonomous and separated as possible. So, I mean, the majority of parents probably don't have a joint pickup, but there's going to be some parents which are picking up at both schools, and we'd obviously allow for that, but we want to try to keep the flows going as much as possible. So, likelihood is we have a traffic engineer on board to, or civil that would help us with those counts.
Thank you.
So again, back to the assumptions, a lot of the same assumptions as far as conceptual, actual costs informing these, the 2020 new geothermal. Here we've included $3,000 per student on that furnitures, fixtures, and equipment budget. We did use the intermediate school as a basis of design, so what that means is we did look at the finishes and everything about that school and really carried a lot of those assumptions through to our costing. Contingency here in the range of 15%. And then you'll see when we present the numbers, we provided a range for both the 800 person building and the 1,000 student building. And the low range is really matching intermediate standards almost exactly. The high range is looking at intermediate, but then also some things that have maybe changed in the last 5 or 6 years that we're seeing from a educational facility perspective. That could include tunable lighting, additional green roof, as I mentioned before, some glass partitions to create more collaboration space. And so what we want to do is at least give you a range at this point to see really intermediate brought forward, and here's maybe what some of the schools being built today are like. So if you look at option one, again, which was the 800 student with the ability to expand, it's in that range of 65.8 million to 67.7. We've assumed as far as the outside goes, so the parking and the surfaces, the same cost for both option one and two. So that way, if you did expand, you would only have to expand the building, you wouldn't have to mess around with site work. From a cost perspective, it makes a lot more sense to put that infrastructure in day one.
How much site work do you have to do to put this new building up?
So I don't know how familiar you are with the topography over to this side of the site, Jack, but there is quite a bit of material that would have to come out of there. Whether it was spoil from the previous project or just the natural topography there. So there's removal, a lot of that, and then the hard surface is pretty straightforward. And then as Chris indicated, we've assumed some type of modification to those drives out to Woodland there, anticipating there could be some costs there. From the south part of the site with the geothermal, so that whole area is going to get torn up on the south, and then it'd be replacing that, similar to what was done last time on the south side. From an infrastructure standpoint, you do have a retention pond there. We've not validated whether that's sized to take on the additional load from the impervious surface. So we have assumed that we need to modify that and then extend utilities, storm utilities, water, and all the other utilities that have to serve this building. And then as you look at option two, it's in that 71.8 to 73.9 million. That is for the full 1,000 students. Some of the other differences between the two options, as Chris alluded to, we would really still build that core to match that larger population, because you're not going to add on to your gym as you bump up that population, the cafeteria area and some of those common spaces. And so as you look at option two, it ends up being a little bit more cost effective on a per square foot basis, because you've already built some of those core spaces and the addition right away.
What are you looking at per square foot right now?
Right now, you're in that 240 to 245, 250 range there, Jack. I didn't think that was a number I cared about, Jack. So just to give you some perspective.
Well, we can talk offline.
But if you bring heritage, if you bring intermediate forward, engineering, news record, cost indices, it's at about that high 238, 239 range. And then if you look at programmatically, the differences from intermediate to middle with compressed air, tech ed areas, the music areas, some of those other areas really ends up being about $5 or $6 a square foot. So we did, I guess I failed to mention, these numbers were based on about a 6-page, 300-line item budget for each of the schools that we didn't want to go line by line with your group on, but we did build up to these numbers in a very detailed basis over the last 6-7 weeks.
I'm sorry, did both these options assume a comparable kitchen area to the intermediate school or less? Because my understanding was that when this went up, it would only probably need like a warming center. The food might come from a different location. Am I wrong on that?
We're planning that this facility will have a full cooking kitchen, just like the other facility. So, and I think that's district-wide. You guys are cooking at all your facilities.
Okay. To Jack's point, one of the things that he and I've talked about is that square foot cost, based on kind of what do you put into the building can determine your cost. And that's really the range piece, Jay, you were talking about, was different types of finishes depending on what are some of the amenities that you want to put into the space. Certainly both of them create a phenomenal instructional environment. One of them is built off of a standard of 2014. One is building in some things that are being tried now in some of the new schools. So that's a piece that's a difference as far as what you're actually putting into some of the costs of those dollars. And I think that's partially what, Jack, you and I have talked about offline a little bit, is what is kind of that dollar amount per square foot you're shooting for based on the types of school that you're looking to have as your own.
On to the next ones? All right, so we did have an opportunity to go and do a board tour workshop at the middle school and high school. And resulting from that, we're looking at this, and this has kind of been a consistent discussion throughout the whole thing of how do you look at the high school and existing middle school? If you build a new middle school, what happens to the existing middle school? And everything that we've talked about with meeting with the high school, talking with Randy and administrative team, really is to truly understand what you want and need to do with that facility, you have to kind of take ownership of it and kind of live in it for a little bit to understand how you're going to use it, how the kids are going to use it, how you're going to circulate between the two buildings, what programs are going to go where, and administratively how you might operate those two facilities. And that will start to paint a picture, all right? And you're not going to really understand that until you kind of get your hands on that building altogether. So the approach that you're seeing here really is not some comprehensive overhaul of both facilities, but it's really to identify some areas within the existing high school that clearly have been identified as areas where you need improvement, where you want to make some changes, and then allowing the rest of it to be something that you live in for a little bit to kind of understand how it's going to work.
If I can just add something, Chris, really the items that Chris is going to walk through here, when we did our tour of that facility, if it was mentioned in our walkthrough, it's found a space here generally. So whether it was something that was kind of a thing that may find its way forward in our planning, or if it's a piece that is may not. It's really been put out here just as we walked that facility and looked at our needs. So a lot of different pieces to this.
What you're thinking is the orange is add-on, and the rest is renovation.
So yeah, typically, exactly. Yeah, the blue colors are renovation of existing, and the orange would be new construction. So as we look at the existing high school, just focusing there, I think a couple ones. The first space that we toured, maybe Randy, you could point to the staff office area where we potentially identified that being as a large group instruction training area. It was on kind of that upper level, lower one. Further down. Right
Back.
there, yeah, that one there.
Why is everybody else telling us?
Randy,
Don't put me on the spot.
Gotta get a little. So that's one where we're like, let's do some finished renovation there, make it a large group area, maybe put a movable partition in, maybe a couple conferencing or small group areas. Pretty simple. What Randy initially pointed was the welding and shop area. That we've sort of broken down in a couple little areas there. We know that the welding area needs to be redone, have some better connectivity and visibility for safety reasons, is just being able to supervise. Looking at a finishes renovation to the shop area, getting some exposure into that program so students can actually see some of the cool things that are being done in there. And then also looking at a couple of the other spaces next to the Fab Lab up there that will get maybe light renovation, and beginning to see how those spaces can all kind of be connected together, because as you look at some of the curriculum that you're exploring, how those spaces are going to have to work together in order to do some of those things, whether you're bringing robotics in or some advanced manufacturing, you're going to go back and forth between spaces in order to do that. So thinking about how that works. The one directly above it, the big light blue swath, that's your current LMTC. We didn't tour this at the walkthrough, but there's been conversations about some ideas and trying to bring this space up a little bit, mainly furniture based. We don't have a price for this today to share, but it's something that we're ongoing and tracking as there's probably some potential here to upgrade furniture and things like that. We did go to the original theater, which is a small theater, dark blue up on the top. And during our walkthrough, the conversation of black box came up. We went back, looked at some of the drawings and some of the roof elevations, because you do have an elevated roof there. It's not really, in my recommendation, high enough for a black box. You know, in order to make that space a black box, it would be pretty extensive. I mean, you'd be pulling a roof off, new structure. You know, in my opinion, the amount of money that you put into it is probably, you know, to have a black box that's not close to your drama department at all might not be the best solution. So what you're seeing up there as a dark blue shaded area really is just to fill the floor and potentially make that a different location for one of those large group instructional or training areas, similar to the one at the other. So at the end of the day, it may be one or the other, you know, that type of thing. But just so you know, we're not costing out a black box for that existing small theater. Yes.
You know,
And then-
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Now, one of the thoughts, when you look at the innovation, how you're bringing tech ed and art together, you know, is there a way to move the art area out of where it is, closer to the innovation, and move some of the, you know, classrooms into that art area? You know, because you're really bringing those groups together, and you're across the facility.
And that was a conversation we had. We had not costed that out here as that level of a programmatic move, and it may be a piece that we look at in the future, or if it's something that interests us looking at now, we can certainly add that to the conversation. I think this is definitely this part of what's being presented is quite fluid at the moment as far as trying to really identify some of those spaces.
And then the last one here, you can barely see a little blue rectangle down sort of by the locker room, by the pool. Probably not in the right area, maybe not, but there was talks on the tour of creating a family changing toilet area down there that's independent of the locker rooms, whether it's for special needs or for you know, non-gender, gender neutral type thinking. So we're looking at some type of potential renovation down there to create an autonomous type of family changing toilet area down by those locker rooms.
Would that be like an actually accessible shower? Because I know one of the things that I've specifically heard about is a caregiver can't get their own child into one of the restrooms to shower for the pool.
Yeah. Yeah, so it would be that. It might be, you know, sometimes people refer to them as family rooms or cabanas or something like that, you know, but essentially it could be one or two formatted down there where it would have fully accessible shower, toilet changing, sort of, you know, individual lockers and things like that. So, as we look a little further down on the site, there's a couple things here in orange. The one next to the bleachers really is just simply an extension of your existing bleacher system at the varsity field there. Sounds like you're running out of some room there. And
we have our band right now on the track and trying to see how you
give it some additional capacity. And then the other two items there, the orange rectangle just at the bend of the track. There's a lot of discussion about the challenges that you have with regards to your locker rooms there. This is a suggestion that says you build a standalone locker team room building adjacent to the football field and track. And that would accommodate that, so you no longer have teams going into the center of the high school to access those locker rooms. The last thing, Vogel, just by chance, actually has done this before. that orange line is essentially a connection between the two schools, an elevated connection or a skywalk. They had done it. We wanted to just see, hey, show you guys what something like that would cost. If I go back 2 slides, the second bullet point here, do not limit options to potential future phases. I do want to put a disclaimer out there that as you get down to those two new locker rooms and especially the connector, that does impact potentially what happens in the future. So something to keep in mind without knowing exactly how this school develops, if it takes over the new middle school. allowing yourselves a little bit of latitude. So, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jay. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not yet. I forgot this was behind you too. So the last thing up at the high school campus at the TLC building, which we also toured. Currently, you have your district clinic off-site that you lease space. Potentially, if space becomes available at the middle school for some of the curriculum program to go into, we're looking at the first level of the TLC to potentially be renovated into a district clinic there. So renovating it, the dark blue area to have some exam rooms and lab space, and then support spaces for that for your district health services.
So the second scope statement should have just been on the previous. Okay.
Oh, yes. Sorry about that. All right.
All right,
Jimmy.
again, same assumptions from a budget perspective. And then here's the different options that we've laid out. So that high school academic core, so we've taken all of those various areas and combined them. As Chris mentioned, there is some opportunity if you wanted to say not do this, do that, or maybe if the art comes into that. I will mention with that family and changing area, it looks like a little blue box, but we don't know exactly where we would tie in sanitary and stuff, so even though it's a little blue box, that could become a little bit bigger scope, so we've tried to account for that. But as you look at all those areas, it's just shy of that $3 million. The locker room, that ends up becoming a standalone building with just locker rooms, so it becomes a pretty intensive space when you start looking at plumbing and fixtures and floor exterior walls. As Mike alluded to, he's at least shown it where it would give the ability, if you did expand the existing middle school that direction, that you could still come into the middle school without having to go through the locker rooms. But that ends up being about that $2.8 million. The bleacher extension there we were looking at was a little bit over 500 additional capacity, and that does include the bleachers and then any of the impacts to the site work around that. The connection of that $2.5 million, so just by chance, as Chris indicated, I think it's 292 feet between these, and we've built one that was 297. So
Really?
we measured it, and we're like, well, let's at least bring it forward, because just to give you an idea of, it was a second level skywalk that you're able to drive vehicles and stuff under. But and then, as Chris mentioned, if you do end up adding on to the middle school one direction or the other, obviously that need for a skywalk gets shorter and shorter. And then in the TLC there, we've assumed about half of that of really heavy renovation, and then half of the light renovation basement space. Smart.
So for the TLC, that's strictly the first level, not the lower level?
No,
Or
that's
is
the
it
low.
both?
It's the
Oh,
lower
that's the
level.
lower level.
Not the upper
Maintaining the
layers.
TLC as is.
Yeah, that's where you enter where Taher is and the.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Transition program is.
And we've assumed that a lot of the walls are going to have to get torn out and replaced there, but once you actually fit out your program into there, there could be some opportunities to save money there too.
All right, a couple more here. This is just a short one. There has been the identified need to increase some of the office capacity here at the district office, individual offices at the district office. What we're proposing here is just looking at some of the area at the back and just doing a partition exercise, redividing up, getting a couple more office spaces within that footprint, pop a couple windows in as needed for those offices, potentially a couple conference rooms if needed, or maybe that's some other type of function, but we put a little extra square foot in there. And then also looking at expanding your parking lot to the south of this building, so you can see that additional parking rectangle over there on the side, giving a little bit more capacity here for parking, so adding some surface parking in that.
So from a costing standpoint, this includes both the parking and those offices. With the parking, there also may be a need for stormwater, so there potentially be a need for a pond or a way to address that stormwater as well that we've tried to account for.
Is that in the 475?
Yeah. And the last two slides, I promise. So the capital maintenance, we met with the facilities committee last week Monday, and they felt comfortable with, at least at this point, us presenting what we're calling the immediate needs through year 4 from that facility maintenance plan that's been referenced. And if you look at those, that totals about $24 million. And again, this does not include any of the heritage dollars because we've incorporated those into the heritage budgets. One thing we are doing here, we've vetted and validated the costing, but the projects in that list are really standalone. So a good example would be ceiling replacement, and then looking at lighting. If you did ceiling and lighting together, it can be more cost effective because you're doing everything above the ceiling versus doing one or the other. And so we've got time set up with John to really start digging into the next level of these costs and really identifying where some of those economies of scale can be had. Right?
So does that include the middle school maintenance costs currently? So that if we
Yes.
did nothing, that's what it would be, but if we were to do the middle school, that'd be about 5 million taken away from that list?
Heritage has 5 million out of this list, but your existing middle school has a lot of scope in here. It's probably 4 to 5 million, depending on how far out you go in years.
Just the maintenance needs of the middle school building. Even if we built a brand new middle school, we still need to do the maintenance at the current
Okay.
site, and
All
that's
right.
included here.
Any additional questions or comments that you have?
Enough numbers for you?
It's just kind of overwhelming.
It's a lot, and like we said at the beginning, you know, this is kind of just identifying a comprehensive list of, hey, these are some of the upcoming needs that you might be facing, right? How do you begin to prioritize what you want to potentially do? So we try to get you as much information as possible so you can digest it and make some educated decisions.
Part of what we see as the next steps is, like I had shared, having another board meeting this month where we can just have a conversation about all these pieces. Let some of this sink in, let you think about where those pieces are, and then for us to come back and to structurally start to talk about things that resonate with you, don't resonate with you, questions, things you'd like costed out differently. And then I know we looked at how can we start pairing some of these things together into possible optional phasing type of projects like we did when we put together things for 2014.
So just building on that, Randy, a couple of additional next steps. We have a staff workshop planned for February 13th, a couple of days from now. The focus there is heritage, so this presentation, the heritage portion of the presentation will largely be repeated for the staff. It's going to be at Heritage, but certainly all staff are invited to participate. We hope to gather some good input from staff, how they want to teach, how facilities can help support their instruction at that workshop, and we'll definitely aggregate that information and get it to you. Randy already mentioned the board workshop that we hope to put together. We have that tentatively scheduled, I believe, for the 17th. And really there we're kind of digging into these options and starting to talk a little bit about how they can maybe be pieced together for a more comprehensive, or a series of more comprehensive long-range plans. Looking forward a little bit further out, late March, we're hoping to do a community workshop or a good intensive dialogue session with the community, during which we talk to them and gather some input, feedback about the options that you are refining, the more comprehensive plans that you're refining, and then at some point, spring, hopefully by I would say May or June, we hope to have results of from a community survey. You're familiar with that process from 2014. We hope to repeat that process, results coming probably sometime in very early June. Any questions about the process?
You talking board workshop February 17th?
That was a piece that I've put out there a couple times just as a marker, and when we set meetings tonight, we'll want to have a conversation about if that date will work. But we're looking at a time where we can really come together and just have really some discussion back and forth with regards to some of these things, and we can start to, as we keep moving forward, we want to start to narrow them, and we'll be starting to piece together that survey that we'll do with the community, and all of these pieces will help with that. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good job.
Enrollment projections, seen through a different lens.
Yeah. So I'm going to let Rebecca pull that up for me.
Oh, one thing on that, can we get that PowerPoint first since it wasn't in board book?
Yeah.
Oh,
That would be
That
great.
email though.
It was in the email.
It was in the email.
did I miss it?
Email.
Overlooked it, maybe.
Email on Friday.
Oh,
Okay.
And there was an
Yeah.
attachment.
Yep. So if you don't have it, let me know, but we'll get that. What I wanted to do with enrollment projections was particularly after we had a conversation with Mark Roffers, I forget if that was December or January. One of the things that he did was he put together enrollment numbers based on 5-year spans. And his numbers were built off of resident enrollment or resident students. And his whole project is based off of trying to look at community growth and how that impacts us as a district, which it gives us a good indicator and some trends. What I wanted to do, though, is go back and take a look at it in a little bit more specific way, particularly as we've looked at the middle school and the middle school enrollment. So Tim Schell and I both did a different methodology of figuring out enrollment projections. So that's really what you see here. The first method is we're looking at just your percent growth between grade spans, so between K1, 1, 2, 2, 3. What's your percent growth going back over a number of years? And then also, Tim did his based off of annual 10-year, 5-year, 3-year trends and averages. And what I'm going to speak to, and actually in your packet today at your table, you'll see kind of the details of all of those pieces. It looks like this. So that shows you all the data graphs and also how far we went back. They're both built off of third Friday counts. So we went back to the third Friday counts for those given years, looked at the resident students, and then took the net gain that we have with open enrollment. So you're actually looking at number of students in our seats on the third Friday in September counts. Once we figured out what our metric was to cast forward, then both of our methodologies just moved forward to look at what's happening at 7th and 8th grade over time. So 2019, that's the school year we're in, that's September 2019. On that date, we were at 641 students. One of the pieces that Mark accurately articulated to you was you do have a dip in enrollment after this year. So next year you have a couple smaller classes here, 620 students. So our capacity, our functional capacity at the middle school is 670 students. So right now you see us dip down, but what you see starting to move forward is this really large class here, our current 5th grade class starting to move in. And as you figure in the growth of these classes over time, you can see what happens to our enrollment. It goes from 620 to 702 to 727, and then it starts to find kind of a new plateauing area in that high 600s, low 700s area. That's the piece I just wanted to really, I was interested to see what does not only what our student count today looks like, but what's that growth trajectory looking like as we move over the next few years. And then how does that inform any decisions that we're making with regards to referendums, timing of projects, etc., which is a piece I know we have to have some conversations about.
So when you say current capacity 670,
right,
that includes the relocatable?
No, does not include them. With the relocatable, I believe it's 720. So with the relocatable, that's 2 additional classrooms.
When you say relocatable, those are the outdoor
That's the
ones?
portable one there. That's the 2 outside that are in the, not sure what the correct term is for those. Yeah. So, but this is really just meant to be informational pieces tonight. You can see similar type of pieces down here with Tim's numbers. You see a very similar trend of where you're at in 2019, what happens in 20, and you start to pop up. We have a few differences in 10, 15 kids in a few areas, but generally the trends stay the same. But I thought this was good information for you to be thinking about, particularly as we look at how we want to position any of the work or any of the options that we may want to consider at the middle school.
When you're looking at that 6, 7 numbers, that includes converting that 1 computer lab, right? Or it doesn't?
That's not at that level, no.
Okay.
That's not. This is based off of when we looked at how we've utilized the building when Epstein-Yoon went through this for our last referendum. It was then utilizing 90% capacity. So that's where that number comes from. The piece that we need to go back through is I've asked Marcy to look at how we currently use the building and how we historically had used it. So I need to do a walkthrough with her to understand exactly what her notes are reflecting so that we can then revisit that number. And that would include more of what Dave's talking about as we repurpose pieces, as we brought in business ed and ag and some of those classes.
And you're also going to look at the infrastructure parts, like what the gym was designed for,
Right.
what the, I call them facilities. That's honestly not a good
It's
word
your
to use
core
there.
area.
Your core areas that basically we had enough bathrooms for X number of students.
Yeah.
We kept converting more classrooms, we kept adding students, but we've never added a bathroom.
Right.
Or we've never increased the size of the gym, or things like that.
Right. So those will be pieces that are in process. But I thought this is at least good information to start thinking about as we process through. That's all I have.
Okay, next, discussion on key communicators, Dr. Hilton.
Yes, what I've provided to the board, and I believe this is in your extras file, is just what we've called the key communicators document. It's actually a new process that Epstein-Yoon has recommended we take a look at, and I think is not only a good idea as we talk about referendum type work, but probably a piece that looks forward to how we engage with the community. Certainly a priority. Yeah. So what you've seen up here is just, yeah, you could take that one down since it's got a lot of personal numbers on it there.
Yeah, I was gonna bring that up, is that by putting this in this document, we just put people's personal information in a public document.
The one from the previous referendum is still up in some years ago, so if people want it, it's already there.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably already a public document just by its existence, but it also has, that one wasn't out to the public in the board book, it was blocked, so. But that's part of.
So maybe you're gonna get there, but this is a pretty formalized list of organizations.
Yeah.
And I, like the workshop that I went to at State Convention, it advocated for the value of making less formal linkages.
Sure.
So like we did with the last referendum process, but groups like the Romeos, the senior
Absolutely.
citizens, you know, wherever there's key groups of people that gather that with different demographics and different
Right.
points of view, it's hooking into those less formal
Right.
groups.
And I think this can be individuals, this
Yeah,
can be, it can
yeah.
be groups. This was just I think pulling it
Starting
from some
point.
of our community ed contacts that are out there. And I think that's really probably what Mike's referring to, is because there's some of those key people you contact if you have
Right.
questions about that. And that's where this was initially just pulled from, and then now it needs to be built out. So I think what I'm looking for is one, just for the board members to take a look at this, and if there are people, organizations, etc., that you would like us to add to this, just give those to Rebecca and we will add those in. what I anticipate utilizing it for is a way to reach out to, as we start to have meetings or information, people we can start to specifically direct some of this information to. And when we're not in a referendum time, it's probably a good place for us to also communicate things that are going on within the district itself, which has definitely been a priority area for us to look at how we can improve those in the future too. So that's generally what that is. I just wanted to really bring it here, talk about what its existence is, and then look for your feedback, and you can just provide any other contact folks or groups to Rebecca, and we'll continue to populate it. And then at some point, maybe Joan, as board president, you and I can send something out that just invites those folks to be following along with us.
Thank you. Do you want to say any more about the 90-day outlook?
Yeah, I'm just going to have you pull it up, and I think Andy did most of it, but I'll take 2 minutes just to. The biggest piece that we want to look at is board workshop. We've proposed the 17th, so we'll talk about that in a few minutes when we get to the end of our meeting. And then taking a look at really that survey. We're looking to launch the survey on April 7th or thereabouts. So it gives us a little bit of a time frame of, as we start to narrow some of these pieces, as we start to articulate what are some of the questions that we want to ask the community and how they feel about some of the things that we're reviewing. We need to start piecing that survey together. We are going to have a workshop where we talk about, with the board, their input and have their final say on the survey so that you can be comfortable with what we're asking, how we're asking it, and then the data that comes back can be informative to us.
Great. Thank you. On to administrative reports. Sheila, we get to talk about kids. Woo! Enough about buildings.
We'll bring a few of them your way. Summer school, right?
Summer school, yes.
So you received the report about the class offerings and fees that we're hoping to do this year. And I didn't know if you had questions for me.
See a lot of zeros.
Isn't that great? I keep telling you, it's a win-win-win. It's great for taxpayers, it's great for parents, awesome for kids.
I mean, this was a piece that we made some changes to about a year ago, and I think that it worked very well during our last summer school piece. Sheila's reviewed all of the different aspects of it, and the recommendation is as it is in front of you, so.
Motion to approve.
Second. Awesome.
Any other questions or discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Nice job, Sheila.
See how painless this has gotten about so much?
Thank you, Sheila.
Special ed staffing request.
Yes, in your packet you'll see a memo from Mr. Ely with regards to needs to add an additional paraeducator for some special education needs that have arisen. These are pieces that we would certainly look at transfer of service dollars in the future. I've also taken a look at where we're sitting with our contingency. So I think between our contingency and some other dollars that we are that we have in the district, I think we are in a position where there are funds for this. We'll certainly at the end of as we move forward with the end of the budget year, we'll be looking at our contingency dollars and our other funds to make sure that we are covered on all the expenses we've put forth here. But at this point, it looks like we have about $20,000 left in contingency.
Motion to approve.
Thank you.
Second.
Any discussion?
And so with this, that basically erases the contingency.
For the most part, that's taking care of our contingency. There are some things that I've started to take a look at, that it's actually
Sure.
sunny and warm in February helps us on
Right.
some of our, so we're
Right.
saving, we're about 40,000-50,000 ahead right now in utilities from where we were a year ago. So there are some other dollars that we feel we have some latitude as we have costs that potentially could arise. But yes,
Good.
Mark, to
Yep.
contingency dollars, yes. You may see, if you see any of our reports come through, that contingency looks like it's in the negative. It's because we have a check coming through from the lightning strike at Heritage that will bring it back to positive.
I did see that, and I was wondering.
Yes.
Okay. So there's a motion on the table. Any other concerns about funding this? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. We are down to the consideration of the gymnastics co-op
Yep.
team, which
Motion
we
to
have
approve.
done.
Second.
Any discussion?
Go ahead.
No discussion. All in favor of that co-op team continuing?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Awesome, thank you.
Correspondence?
Correspondence, you can see it's always wonderful when you see one of our kids gets a perfect score on the ACT. So Thomas Hughes, congratulations to him. That is a wonderful accomplishment. I always envy our kids who can do that. We also have U.S. Presidential Scholars Program. We have a student who is a finalist in that, and Brian, you can see that Louisa Davidson is continuing to move forward in that process, so that's exciting for him. And then also just wanting to point out again the student artwork that we have on display. That was on display at our state convention, so appreciate all of those kids and the teachers for supporting their work moving forward.
Congratulations to all of those individuals. Next, we have consent agenda, which we could take in its entirety or pull anything out.
I would like to pull out the foreign language, the foreign transfer student request, just to discuss it.
Okay.
That's the AFS student.
Yeah.
The AFS. Okay. Any other pullouts? If not, I would like a motion to approve the consent with that pullout.
I move we approve the consent agenda with the exception of E.
Need a second?
Second.
Any discussion on those items?
I just have one question.
Yes.
And I just get pedantic about the issue of a donation or a gift. When we're getting gifts, are we providing any sort of like taxable form to the organizations? Because when we call it a gift, it's different from a donation.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know if that's clear or not. It's great when we're getting things like pay at the pump and whatnot, but I always wonder how is it classified? Are we giving someone the credit for that day that uses a tax deduction?
We usually send them a letter that just explains that they've provided a donation to the district in that amount.
Okay. All right, thanks.
And as I've questioned that with a few other organizations, that's usually a piece that they as an entity then work through their own tax accounting to determine how they utilize it or not.
Any
And as a
other-
board, I'd just like to, again, express our gratitude to Cops for Kids, Lions, and of course some efforts for the generosity.
Right. Thank you. Any other questions on the consent? With the pullout of the AFS student, all in favor of passing the consent?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Now the discussion on the foreign exchange student.
I saw two issues on this one compared to all the other ones we've done. Is one, the students seem to have great difficulty this past year with their grades, and that, you know, these things happen fine. We have students like that. But to sit there and change their school in February to the end of the school year, how they integrate into our classroom to help them academically perform well is extremely concerning to me. That doesn't seem the time when you would move somebody and then expect them to do well in the program. But then the other point is, based on some of the letters and everything I read in the application, maybe this is a way for the student to help build their confidence back up and do better. So I'm sitting here flipping coins over whether this is better for the student or not.
Yeah.
For us, it's typical. We do AFS, the kids come, it's usually great and everything. This one, I just, looking at it as to helping that student, I'm not sure we are or we aren't. But then if the student gets rejected on this, now I'm worried you're hurting the student more. So
I guess without trying to keep the kids some of the backstory, I would say that this is probably a positive for the kid. Well, this was about a 2-week discussion, Rebecca, before it came here. And it's just with regards to some things with the previous placement that were not probably conducive to,
So the student is in AFS right now somewhere else, because that's
Yes,
nowhere in
in
the
the state.
application.
yeah, the
Yeah.
student is in AFS in another placement, and there's some connections to families in Waunakee that would bring the student here. So that's part of what's happening. It's not, the placement isn't going well. So that's why the family in Waunakee who will be hosting has advocated for this, and then AFS has worked through the channels with Brian Borowski, et cetera. So from our perspective, as we vetted it out, we do feel it's something that would be in the benefit of the child. We normally don't take, we usually have a pretty strict process as far as when we accept exchange students. It's usually a request in the summer, and then it's for the fall. Our policy is really silent on mid-year ones, but if you think back, probably 4 or 5 years ago, we did something similar where we took a student just for a semester. This one's got a little bit of uniqueness to it in that the student is already in the States. They are in AFS, and AFS is looking for an alternative placement from where they're at that they feel would be a better place, and that's where this has landed with us. And I think it's a great question.
Is the student in Wisconsin or?
No.
Okay.
So with that discussion, do we have a motion to accept this for an exchange
Move
student?
approval of acceptance of the foreign exchange student.
Second.
Any other questions or discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. We are down to board business and then agenda setting. Any board business?
I don't.
So we need to set meetings and agenda.
Oh, quickly, I just will say, there's hearings on the dyslexia proposed legislation, and I am interested in at least sitting in on that. I may go and do that.
Do you know when that is?
I think it's Wednesday, but I'll look it back up. Something else can do. One of the bills seems to be advocating for a specific screener to be used. It's a screener we've used before, but it's a challenge with the legislation because some other districts use other screeners. I'm just curious to hear the discussion. There was also concern expressed about this at the state convention with one of the other resolutions, that some of this sounds good in theory, but unless the state comes across with funding to support
Well, then feel
both
free
the
to.
guidebooks, the professional development, the additional testing that they're wanting all the districts to be doing, then what's the point of the legislation? It becomes another unfunded mandate. So,
I make a motion.
Are they writing them in all?
yeah, I would like to
Make a
at least go
motion
and
to
listen,
do
not
Absolutely.
speak on our behalf, but,
Absolutely.
Are they using cursive or?
oh, they didn't talk about person though.
Well, then you should attend the special session on the tax windfall and about whether it goes to school districts or whether it becomes something else.
Okay, let's set some meetings.
Yeah, let's do
All right.
that.
So I'm going to start off with an additional meeting recommended for the 17th. Does that work for people? A week from tonight? You said
It works for me.
When do you come
it
back?
does not work for you, Jack.
I leave Saturday, come back Friday.
The 17th might be hard for me. I can do the 19th or the 20th easier, but I might be able to do the 17th. I won't
So you're not back
Could
till
we
the
do it later
21st?
this week?
this weekend, correct?
No, we're not ready for it. Andy, do you have an idea of what the availability of, because this includes the
You're not going to China, are you?
Vogel and EU 18 as well. And if the 17th doesn't work around the table, do we have, can we go to like the 24th? Does that get too late for us?
I don't think the
I'm not in
24th
town.
gets too late, Randy. I would just need to check availability for EUA, for
Right.
Chris in particular, and probably Amy as well.
All right,
Back on the 25th.
back in the 25th. Okay, we've got interviews that day. I'm sorry, Jack, when are you gone?
Said it's
Basically,
leaving
It's gone to the
Saturday.
21st.
Yeah, it's gone till the 21st.
Yeah, at what point is
This
six
is
of us
what-
good enough?
Yeah, I mean, this is just when I have concerns if we keep pushing
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
gonna get me tight. So I've gotta find something, certainly probably here before the end of the month. So if the 17th doesn't work, 24th doesn't work, when did you say you're back, Jack? I apologize.
21st.
21st. With
Could you go the 25th after the interview?
Could.
Set it for 5 or 6.
Yep, we set it at the 25th, maybe, Andy? If you wanna-
Taking a look right now
Right.
at the calendars.
All right.
Oh,
Yeah.
Because part of this is also I want to have certainly Chris and Jay
Yes.
and those folks that they're a key part of that dialogue. 25th works for you, Bill Joe?
Yes. 25th works for me. Does it work for you, Tom? Everybody's good on the 25th if our contractor.
What time are we
While
talking?
while Andy's looking those up, let's kind of see if there's other things that we can also schedule here. And I'm going to look at the first week in March. I do need a budget and a facilities meeting. Only Wednesday the 4th does not work with me, any of the others do.
Wednesday the 4th doesn't work?
Does
for you?
not work for me. So either the 2nd, the 3rd, or the 5th.
I'm fine with them.
Second's fine.
2nd. So
We're talking
Facilities and
budget.
budget.
Oh, together,
So, well,
We
back
do
to back.
back to back, okay.
Probably look at facilities first and then budget. Does that work?
Sure.
Is that okay? So if we did that, is
So you're
there,
talking the second now?
I'm looking at March 2nd, yes.
Okay.
Does that work for you,
5
Joe?
o'clock.
What's that?
5?
Yes, if we could do a 5 o'clock and,
6:30?
yeah, I think that makes
I
sense.
mean, I don't know how long do you.
Yeah, I think that's safe. So if we did facilities at 5 and we did budget at 6:30, that work? Sure. On the 2nd? Okay.
Randy, sorry to interject, but Chris and Amy are both available on the 25th. I'm available on the 25th as well, so I think that would work.
So you think that would go? So the 25th of February for our special, or our additional meeting, that would be great.
So should we make a motion for that right away?
And what time? What do you think?
Oh, we were thinking at 5:30 on the 25th?
Perfect.
Sorry.
Okay.
Okay.
So can I
Yes.
have a motion for that?
So move.
Second.
Mark and Dave, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Brian, HR committee, did you?
I think it'd be great if you could get one first week in March.
Yep. So either the,
I can't on the 3rd.
about the 5th?
That worked good for me.
The 5th for HR?
What time?
Julie. I think you could name the time, so.
Earlier the better for me. Who's in?
Are you
Jack?
talking morning?
4:30 a.m. or is that too early?
I have plans.
Oh, are we gonna do it during the day, not at night?
Can we do it in the morning?
I can do it in the morning, but what time do you have plans?
7:30 to 8:30.
Oh, want to do it after 8:30?
Yeah, do 9.
8:30?
8:45.
8:45?
8:45?
8:45?
Yeah, we can do that.
8:45
On the 5th?
on the 5th. 8:45 a.m.
Got it.
There we go. All right.
Curriculum,
Curriculum.
Yes.
we need some,
So I'd like to schedule our next two.
perfect.
And, you know, one option, I hadn't had this on my list, but if Monday the 17th at 3:30 if I were staying away from that because of the facilities. But
I'm okay on the 17th at 3:30.
February?
Yes, I can.
17?
at 3:30?
Yeah.
Perfect. And then, looking into March prior to our April meeting, I'm looking at the week of March 23rd. The Monday, Tuesday, or Thursday, 23, 24, 26. I don't know how that looks for your collective availability.
Open?
Open?
So far.
Which day of the week would you prefer?
Monday?
Let's
Monday.
do the Monday, Monday the 23rd.
What
Thank
time?
you. 3:30.
Did you have a March 16th facilities meeting? No. For some reason, I have a March 16th for facilities.
That's spring break.
That can't be right.
That can't be right.
Randy, are you having a policy committee meeting?
Yes, thank you.
You have two listed here on
Thank you.
the,
February 21st or 27th. Thank you, Rebecca.
I cannot do it on the 27th.
You said
February.
21st was an option?
Yeah.
At 8 a.m.
At 8 a.m.?
For both of them, right?
Yeah.
So 8 a.m. we'll do policy?
On the 21st?
Yes.
Joe, what time do you have to be at the airport?
on the 21st noon. Well, my flight is
All
noon.
right. Thank you. I know we had a goals committee that at some point we wanted to schedule,
No,
but
we're just gonna
I'm
do the-
tapped right now.
Okay, so I guess we,
Do we need a co-curricular?
What time is the policy, 7:30?
Keep controlling.
she's just throwing out meetings now.
8 o'clock.
8 o'clock.
Policy is 8 o'clock.
Policy, 8 o'clock. Okay, so I think we're ready to close. Motion. Jack, do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, thank you.
That's not bad.
Nice, very
Okay.
Considering all
Weird.
that.
Considering all that was on there.
I was wondering if we should bring our jammies tonight.
I told Chris it's gonna be a record for